everyone, and welcome back to another brand new episode of The Completionist. Today, we're covering Super Mario RPG, the remake, quality of life focused remake of a beloved Square Enix game from 1996. Gorgeous music, a fun story, innovative gameplay, and hilarious characters ensure the original game would never be forgotten. This remake is a welcome reminder that great ideas never go out of style. This is a game with a long and storied history. It is revered, crossing over from cult classic status, and is remembered as one of the Super Nintendo's best games. If you're an RPG fan from a certain generation, then you already know how amazing it is. For everyone else, let's set the stage. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another brand new episode of The Completionist, where we don't just beat the games, we complete them. Before we start today's video, I want to recognize that I know that I have lost a lot of your trust at home, and I want to spend as much time as it will take to rebuild and re-earn your trust. It's going to take time, but I'm willing to put in the commitment, and I hope you give me a chance. So with that said, thank you for being here, and thanks for watching. Everyone who knows me knows that Super Mario RPG is one of my favorite games of all time, and here we are with the remake that just came out recently, and I'm so pumped to talk about it. Personally speaking, as I've completed this game, I have learned to love it just as much as I love the original, and I'm giving it my completionist rating of completed. So with that said, this is Super Mario RPG, Return of the King. The Super Nintendo is a favorite system for many people. It contains definitive versions of Zelda, Metroid, and 2D Mario, with Link to the Past, Super Metroid, and Super Mario World. But the Super Nintendo was also an RPG juggernaut. Some of the greatest RPGs ever made were originally released on this system, and that includes Super Mario RPG. In the 90s, Squaresoft, now Square Enix, was arguably at the height of their power and popularity. Some of my absolute favorites from this era are Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana, and Final Fantasy VI. So when I was a kid and heard that the company responsible for those games was working on Nintendo on a Mario game, I got so pumped. And the original is one of my favorite games of all time. It seemed like they could not miss when releasing new RPGs. But there was still some skepticism around Super Mario RPG. How could Mario and his friends fit into the typical turn-based RPG mold? Turns out, Square knew exactly what they were doing and created a formula that still endures to this day. It is a standard RPG in many ways, with a heavy dose of Mario zaniness that is more than just an aesthetic layer. In this era, Nintendo was willing to take big risks with their flagship properties, and that extended to this game. Nintendo placed their trust in Square, and the result was a memorable take on the Mushroom Kingdom, a surprisingly fun story, and some of the best characterization in a Mario game even to this day. This game stands as one of the best and most unique developer collaborations ever, and the remake captures that lightning in a bottle feeling as well. The aesthetic direction of Super Mario RPG has always been a huge highlight to me. This remake features totally new art, which some players may find divisive. The original game's sprites are still beautiful, but the art direction in the remake is incredible. Characters are short and stocky, but are bursting with expression. The colors are vibrant and pleasing to the eye, but the big star, if you'll pardon the pun, is and always has been the music. Legendary composer Yoko Shimomura made a banger soundtrack for the original game, and she is back once again for the remake. One of the best decisions Nintendo made for the remake was the option for players to toggle between the original soundtrack and the new version. It's fascinating to hear the two side by side. The game preservationist fan in me really appreciates that Nintendo went this extra step to include the original soundtrack. See, part of the draw of the original game was its humor. Mario games have always had a certain amount of weird comedy, but Mario RPG took it to the next level with a hilarious script bolstered by incredible localization efforts thanks to the amazing Ted Woolsey. This remake captures the tone of the original game, even if some jokes were translated differently and some pun-based characters now have different names. The gameplay is largely the same, but there is a huge emphasis placed on modern quality of life features that I'll get around to in detail. To sum it all up, if you enjoyed the gameplay in the original but didn't love the backtracking and grinding, this remake pretty much addresses all of that in some very inventive and fun ways. Combat is still turn-based, but timed hits make it engaging. Even though the core of the battle system is almost 30 years old, it is still very enjoyable. They nailed it the first time around, so they didn't have to do much to make it sparkle even more. Outside of combat, Mario and his party go from town to town, dungeon to dungeon, collecting equipment and key items as they meet major characters and plot beats unfold. It's all in service of trying to defeat the big bad, but not Big Bowser this time. Instead, we have a weird robot-looking magician black blacksmith guy with a penchant for creating gigantic sentient weapons. Yeah, this is a game that is still an RPG from the 90s at heart. If you were a fan of the original, you'll be pleased to know the remake is mechanically very similar, even if it looks shiny and modern. The new features don't take away from the charm of the original game, and for completionists, there's actually more to do than you may have initially expected. The original game is packed full of secrets, side quests, and mini-games, and even hidden battles that are more difficult than anything in the main story path. But to give credit where credit is due, Super Mario RPG Remake provides a few different tools, tweaks, and even shakes the order of which items you receive when in order to make the completion process more of a delight. You still have to do the bare minimum. Collect the iconic 7 stars, defeat the final boss Smithy. There are 39 secret chests to find when you're exploring, requiring you to jump in just the right spot. There are unique ultimate weapons and plenty of side quests, bonus missions, and mini-games to conquer. Yes, the 100 jump challenge is still necessary for completion, and yes, it still sucks. Not as much, but it still sucks. The remake keeps all of that intact, but also adds a pretty robust post-game and a monster book to fill out throughout your journey. This is one of those games that's so good and unique that any form of remake is justified in my opinion. I would have taken a straight port on Nintendo Switch Online, even if it's unlikely the SNES version will ever come to Nintendo Switch Online due to licensing issues. Or maybe not, who knows? The fact that Nintendo remade the game from the ground up and added extra challenges to give longtime fans something more to look forward to is fantastic. Super Mario RPG has always been worthy of your time and attention, and this remake only reinforces that idea. Super Mario RPG is a game I complete roughly about once a year. It is firmly in the realm of a comfort game for myself and millions of people. There's something very soothing about completing it, and even if you're maxing out every party member to level 30 or finding the best equipment to tackle the secret boss fight, this remake is a different completion experience. So I'll be focusing mostly on the differences between this version and the original game. I do have my video from many years ago on the original, so you can check that out if you want to get caught up to speed. Super Mario RPG wants you to complete it. The player is rewarded at nearly every turn for doing almost anything. Sometimes it's a material reward, like an item. Sometimes it's a piece of hilarious writing or a fun new cutscene or something. This remake pushes the idea of giving something to the player even further, and it often feels more rewarding to complete as a result. I have spent a lot of time over the years talking about how the original is not only one of my favorite RPGs, but one of my favorite games of all time. That feeling is due to the 1-2 punch of the writing and the gameplay. The premise of Mario RPG is wild. It's a subversive look at the Mario universe that starts off with the usual drama. Bowser kidnaps Princess Toadstool, also known as Peach, and Mario must save her. But nearly right away, things go off the rails. Instead of a long, protracted campaign against Bowser and his minions, Mario defeats him almost immediately, and then the real villain shows up. Bowser's Keep is absolutely wrecked by a giant sword appearing out of nowhere. And just a real quick aside, as a young kid, I thought the sword's name was Smithy, but I was very wrong. Not only does Bowser lose his awesome lava-filled castle, the mystical Star Road is destroyed. And without the Star Road, wishes cannot come true. So Mario sets off to defeat the mysterious Smithy Gang and restore peace to the land. This is an RPG, so you're going to need a party. This is where Square took their biggest swings. How do you provide character to a guy who famously doesn't talk that much? The solution? Make Mario basically mime every interaction he has with anyone. And that solution is classic and is still faithfully represented here in this game. But this remake also injects high-fidelity cutscenes into the mix too. There's no reason those little tiny cutscenes look so insanely beautiful, and yet here we are, watching Mallow be introduced in the most epic way possible. Mallow and Geno, 2 original characters who ended up as stalwart party members, are back, and I could not be happier to see them in action again. Mallow is actually critical for completion purposes this time around. See, in the original game, he had a skill called Psychopath. That skill let players take a look at the enemy's weaknesses and health. He still has the same skill in the remake, though now it's called Thought Peek, and it has an additional function. There's a monster book now that catalogs all the enemies you fight. Using Mallow's Thought Peek on an enemy basically scans the enemy and puts them in the book. But there are some things to keep in mind. Timed hits still apply to spells, obviously, and if you nail the timed hits on Thought Peek, you get a little bonus entry for each enemy. So that means for every enemy in the game, you're going to need Mallow to use this specific move in order to fulfill the completion requirements. There are some fights that you simply just cannot scan because Mallow is not in your party at that moment, but there is a vendor later on that you can pay 3 frog coins per entry in order to fill the missing pieces that you need. So look, this might sound like a bummer because it seems like you have to have Mallow in your party the entire game, and that's kind of true, but that leads to one of the biggest changes of the remake. You can now swap out party members, except for Mario, at any time during a fight, even if that party member is knocked out. It's a welcomed change, even if it serves to make the game substantially easier. In the original game, my usual party makeup would be Mario, Peach, Bowser, with Mallow and Geno being used for specific fights if I had to. But now, I feel like I swapped all of the characters as much as I could, depending on the situation. There's also a couple of other changes that lower the difficulty in my opinion. When you start the game, you can now choose breezy mode, which is essentially the equivalent of story mode. Enemies are weaker, you can hold more items on your persons, and the window for landing a timed hit is way more forgiving. I completed this game on normal mode, but even on normal mode, some changes to combat streamline every fight. Now, if you land a timed attack, you can inflict splash damage on enemies, drastically reducing the time spent in combat. Mastering timed hits is more important than ever because now, every time the player lands one, they increase their combo chain. The higher the combo chain, the bigger stat boost you receive. Your party makeup also determines what combo bonuses you can earn as you build your chains. What's more, you're also building up a meter with every successful timed hit. Once you max out the meter, you can perform a super move with whatever your current party makeup is, dealing massive damage to whoever it is you're fighting. And all these moves range from boosting your party and healing the team, to just absolutely wrecking the battlefield. Either way, these cutscenes are always a pleasure to watch. This is one of those changes that doesn't really need to be in the game, but it further incentivizes the player to get really good at attacking and defending. The battle system was always rewarding and interesting, but these extra bells and whistles push it over the top. And mastery of timed hits and the combo meter makes all the difference in the post-game. Super Mario RPG has always been a relatively short role-playing game, even by completionist standards. That's not a knock against it by any means. It's very satisfying all the way through, and never overstays its welcome. This version of the game feels less grindy than the original because of one other huge change: fast travel. The map of Super Mario RPG was never huge, but it's now significantly easier to navigate. This style of game usually has some kind of backtracking because Mario is essentially an errand boy the whole game, running back and forth between certain areas. But now you can just teleport wherever you need to go to without extra effort. You can now even shortcut your way through various areas, provided the area itself recognizes that it too has a shortcut from the menu. Now, in my eyes, this game does not replace the original, but serves as a testament to why it was considered amazing in the first place. If you missed out on the Super Nintendo version or a Wii U eShop copy, the only other place to legally play Super Mario RPG was on the Super Nintendo Mini. Finally having a version of the game available on Switch is a big deal. When this game was announced earlier this year, it was met with an intense positive reaction. There's a reason why Geno was on the ballot to be a fighter in Smash Bros. Obviously that never came to pass, and he is a costume for Mies. But with this remake, a new conversation is being sparked. Could this indicate that Nintendo is working on a true Super Mario RPG sequel, outside of Paper Mario or Mario and Luigi? Obviously, we don't know for sure until it happens. It seems like this game was kept in the dark up until relatively recently. It deserves to be played by everyone, and the team responsible for this game comes from Square Enix on the remake side of their crew, with several veterans who've worked on previous Dragon Quest games and remakes. So this game was in great hands. Veterans of the game will find plenty to enjoy and enough to keep them interested in a full playthrough. But even if you've only been exposed to turn-based Mario via more modern RPG entries, there is a treasure trove to be enjoyed here. I firmly believe there truly is no other game like this one. Partying up with Bowser and Peach might seem commonplace now, but at the time it was a massive surprise, though a welcomed one, to be sure. This is still a lot of fan favorites version of Bowser, and it is a thrill to watch Mario and Peach team up with their biggest enemy to take down this game's unique roster of villains. Seriously, this game has a very unique and bizarre setup of monsters, from Booster to Valentina and Dodo to, of course, the cake. Players fight pretty much every flavor of Mario enemy, from Goombas to Dry Bones over the course of completion, but it's the Square Enix enemies that really stick in mind. There's an entire group of enemies that call to mind the Power Rangers, known as the Axiom Rangers, and of course the massive sword from the beginning of the game, just begging to be put in its place. Mario RPG Remake can be difficult to complete if you don't vibe with its particular brand of weirdness. Many mini games and side quests may not be very intuitive to find and finish, but each one gives you something incredibly useful. The way mini games and side quests are handled in Super Mario RPG really play into the Mario side of things. There's a surprising amount of platforming and puzzles, and sometimes even platforming puzzles. There are so many reasons why Super Mario RPG is considered one of the greats. The late game challenges and hidden secrets make the game incredibly replayable. And since the main campaign is short comparatively speaking to other games in the genre, it's easy to justify yet one more playthrough. That said, the original game doesn't really offer much in the way of completion bonuses, let alone replayability outside of one or two playthroughs. There is no New Game Plus. It's just playing the game again to enjoy it. But this remake aims to fix some of that, as well as provide more seasoned players with a few worthy challenges. The target audience for Super Mario RPG has relatively grown up. It's likely that over time they've grown used to a little more pushback from RPGs. And this may be one of the reasons behind the post-game challenges offered in this remake. But before I go on about the post-game, we should circle back to what completion of the base game feels like. The more you play this game, the more you will internalize how important mastery of the timed hit system is. You start to get a sense of how to perfectly nail the timing on hits, even without that exclamation point that appears over the character's head. This becomes crucially important for one of the most infamous challenges in Super Mario RPG, the 100 Mario Jump Challenge. I'd say the challenge as it's presented here is a bit easier than the original game, but it is still a huge pain in the ass. Once Mario levels up and unlocks the skill Super Jump, you can try to complete this challenge. It sounds pretty simple. Just hit the timing right with Super Jump, allowing yourself to bounce on an enemy over and 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 over again until you do it 100 times. You get a small reward for hitting this milestone 30 times, but getting to 100 is an entirely different beast. In my experience, there's not a real trick to it. A lot of videos online just say, hey, focus on certain hitboxes and the timing to make sure it's right. Listen to the music if you want. It's honestly a crapshoot. But it took me about 6 hours straight to try and do this right. You have to get the timing right, get in the right headspace, and try your best to avoid hand cramps. This is one of those things where it can take you a dozen hours or so, or 5 minutes, depending on whether or not you're in the zone. Doing this gives you one of the best items in the game, the Super Suit. Seriously, this is one of the best items in the game. It is so powerful. If you're a completionist, you're also going to want to earn medals on all of the minigames, because another thing that was added to this remake is the scrapbook. The scrapbook keeps track of how well you do in all of these cases. Goomba stomping minigame, the Paratroopas minigame, the Beetle racing, Midas River, all of these have scores that determine what kind of medal you earn. So if you want to get gold medals, you must master each one of these minigames. And it wouldn't be Mario RPG without the visit to the casino. Now, I wouldn't say these casino games are especially fun, but they did feel a little smoother to complete this time around than the original. Look the other way, the memory game are exactly what they sound like. If you want to get the star egg, you know that you have to do this 100 times anyways. But a lot of the big pain in the ass in the original version of the game was every time you won a game, you got an item. You'd have to then throw it out or try and keep it. But this time around, one of the biggest improvements in Mario RPG is all of your items that you don't use or can't hold go into a stash. So if you run low on items, instead of buying more, you can just replenish them. The memory game is very, very simple. It's exactly what it sounds like. Don't guess Toad and follow the prompt. The unfortunate thing is you have to do this 50 times, so it can take some time. Speaking of 50 times, when you play the ball game to get the green card for the casino, it only takes about 12 to 13 times. But in the remake, to get the gold medal, you have to do this 50 times. This minigame is not hard by any means, but you have to pay attention. I love that the scrapbook keeps track of these things now. It's nice to have something to point to show that you've done all the things in the game. And it's also nice to have equipment to give your characters as a reward most of the time. The best weapons and armor in the game cannot be bought from a shop. It must be found by being observant and intuitive. Fan favorites, of course, are still in this game, like the Super Suit, the Star Egg, like I spoke before, and of course, the Lazy Shell, both the weapon and the equipment. Essentially what I'm getting at is if you know everything about this game, then you will continue to know everything about this game, with the exception of the post game. Super Mario RPG may seem like it isn't very difficult for newcomers, but the Coolix fight is still a monster of a battle and should not be attempted unless you're very, very confident in your skills. This Final Fantasy themed fight is probably the hardest thing to do in the base game. After finding the best equipment, beating the secret bosses, earning as many medals as you can in all the minigames, and beating Smithy, you're not quite finished. Because this remake does something awesome. It rewards the player with more to do. After beating the game, if you go and visit the Frog Sage, you'll learn more about new mysteries to be uncovered. Now, there are a few rematch battles against bosses you have already defeated, but these fights are way more difficult. Fortunately, if you've internalized the timed hits aspect of life, you'll probably be able to skate through this pretty easily. Bellome and Booster are very rough. Some of the toughest rematches in the game, but the one rematch that blew my mind was the final rematch with Coolix. Now, it's a whole different story once you've finished all the post-game content and take on Coolix once again. This time, this fight is in 3D, so it felt like a bonus that I wasn't really expecting. So one of the funny things about the original Coolix fight in the original game was that Coolix makes the offhanded comment that you guys are in 3D, meaning your party, and he is not. In the base game of this remake, they kept the sprites in the fight the same, except you're in 3D and he's in 2D. In this instance, everyone's 3D, and it feels like a completely different fight altogether. This hands down is the most difficult fight in the entire game. And honestly, the hardest part about this fight really was just getting Mallow to scan everyone and everything. It was very, very frustrating to say the least. But once that was out of the way, and with things like the super suit, the lazy shell, and all of the endgame items, you should be able to out-survive Coolix 3D no problem. But one of my favorite things about the entire post-game process is that these extra fights come with new items and collectibles. Bowser has a brand new final weapon, and it's really, really rad. I love that little plussing to all of this. Completing the game gives you more value, which I love. Longtime fans will appreciate that this remake aims to give completionists something more to enjoy. A good remake justifies itself to the player by reminding them why they loved the first iteration in the first place. Super Mario RPG Remake does that and then some. This is still one of the most unique RPGs you can play, and the fact that it was announced and released within such a short time period is incredible. We barely had time to get over our shock before the game released and reminded us why it's still an incredible, timeless experience. Completing this game is rewarding in and of itself, even if the game doesn't explicitly give you anything for doing so. I didn't expect it to. Having completed the original version so many times, I am very aware that Nintendo's version of a completion bonus doesn't always line up with my own expectations, but I still think it's rewarding to do so. This is an RPG that has stood the test of time, but this version is more than worthy of your attention. Honestly, for this little moment here, when you level up your character, every one of your characters has a dance that they do, and it's the best thing I've ever seen. Look at these guys. This single moment has brought me so much joy. That's the encapsulation of what it feels like to complete this game. While it took me roughly 28 hours to complete the whole thing, I never once struggled and just had a blast playing it. And what a great way to end it all, with my favorite characters vibing out, having a fantastic time breaking it down, and celebrating each other. So those are my thoughts on Super Mario RPG. Let me know what yours are in the comments down below about this game. With that in mind, guys, I give this game my completionist rating of completed. See you soon.